The moon hung low and silver over the Thornwood Pack grounds, and every wolf in the territory had gathered to watch the mating ceremony. Lyra Ashworth stood at the center of the circle, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. For years she had been told she was ordinary, forgettable, a low-ranking Omega who would never matter much to anyone. But tonight, the Pack Bonds had chosen for her. Beta Cain, second only to the Alpha himself, was her fated mate. She had barely dared to believe it when the elders confirmed the bond. Cain was strong, respected, and handsome in a way that made the other wolves whisper with envy. Lyra had spent her whole life on the edges of pack gatherings, never chosen for anything important. Now, for one shining moment, she let herself hope that her life was about to change. Cain stepped forward. The crowd fell silent, waiting for him to complete the bonding words that would join them forever. Instead, he looked at her with cold, unreadable eyes and said the words that would shatter her world. "I reject you as my mate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lyra felt the air leave her lungs. The pain of rejection was not just emotional, it was physical, a deep ache that spread through her chest and down to her bones. She staggered back, and no one moved to help her. No one ever did. She did not wait to hear the whispers that followed. She turned and ran, past the fire pits, past the watching eyes, out through the gates of the Packlands and into the dark forest beyond. She ran until her legs burned and her breath came in ragged gasps, and she did not stop until the trees around her were unfamiliar and the sounds of the pack were far behind. For 3 days, Lyra wandered through the forest known as the Whispering Woods, a stretch of wild land that belonged to no single pack. Wolves avoided it, since the boundaries there were unclear and disputes between territories sometimes turned violent. But Lyra no longer cared about danger. She had nothing left to lose. Her pack had cast her aside. Her mate had humiliated her in front of everyone she knew, and her rank, already low, had fallen to nothing. She was an outcast twice over. She ate what she could find, drank from cold streams, and slept curled beneath the roots of ancient trees. Slowly, hunger and exhaustion wore her down, until, on the 4th night, her legs finally gave out beneath her. She collapsed at the edge of a narrow clearing, her vision fading to black. It was there that Ronan Ferocian found her. Ronan was the Alpha King of the Ferocian Kingdom, a territory far larger and more powerful than Thornwood. He ruled with a firm hand and a guarded heart, having long ago decided that fated bonds were nothing more than old stories meant to comfort weaker wolves. He trusted strength, loyalty, and the strategic alliances that kept his kingdom safe. He did not believe in destiny. That night he had been patrolling the outer edge of his territory alone, as he often did when he needed quiet. It was on this patrol that he caught a scent unlike any he had known before. It was faint, carried on the wind, but it struck him with a force that stopped him mid-stride. Something ancient and instinctive stirred inside him, a pull he could not explain and did not want to feel. He followed the scent through the trees until he found her lying in the clearing, pale and unmoving. For a moment he simply stared, caught between his instincts and his doubts. Then, seeing that she was in danger, he lifted her carefully and carried her back toward his stronghold. His advisors were not pleased when he arrived carrying an unknown wolf from unclaimed territory. Bringing in an Omega from outside the kingdom, especially one who might belong to a rival pack, could be seen as a political provocation, but Ronan silenced their objections with a single look and ordered that she be given care and shelter. Lyra woke 2 days later in a room she did not recognize, wrapped in warm blankets, with the smell of healing herbs in the air. She sat up slowly, her body still weak, and found herself facing a tall man with sharp eyes and an unreadable expression standing near the window. She recognized immediately, though she could not have said how, that this was no ordinary wolf. His presence filled the room the way only an alpha's could, and something inside her responded to it before her mind could catch up. "You are safe here," Ronan said, his voice low and controlled. "You collapsed near my border. I brought you in." Lyra pulled the blankets tighter around herself, uncertain and wary. She had learned not to trust kindness, especially from someone so powerful. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "I am nothing to you." Ronan did not answer right away. The truth was complicated, and he was not ready to admit it, even to himself. Instead, he simply said, "No wolf should be left to die in the woods, that is reason enough." Over the following days, Lyra slowly regained her strength. She was given food, clothing, and a place to rest, though she remained cautious, unsure of what Ronan wanted from her. She noticed the way the other wolves in the stronghold watched her with curiosity and suspicion, whispering about the Omega the king had rescued. Ronan, for his part, found himself drawn to her in ways he could not ignore. He visited her chamber more often than duty required, telling himself each time that he only wished to make sure she was recovering well. But he noticed the sadness behind her eyes, the way she flinched at unexpected sounds, and the quiet strength she carried, despite everything she had endured. Slowly, without meaning to, he began to care for her. One evening, as they sat together near the fire in the great hall, Lyra finally spoke of what had happened to her. She told him of the rejection, of Kain's cold words in front of the entire pack, and of the shame that had followed her ever since. Ronan listened in silence, his jaw tightening with anger he had not expected to feel on her behalf. "He was a fool," Ronan said quietly when she finished. "No wolf capable of such cruelty deserves a mate as strong as you." Lyra looked up at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. For the first time since her rejection, she felt something other than shame. She felt seen. It was that same night that Ronan finally admitted to himself what he had been denying for days. The pull he felt toward her was not simple sympathy or curiosity. It was the fated bond he had long dismissed as myth. Lyra was his mate. He did not tell her right away. He feared how she would react, given what she had already suffered at the hands of a rejected bond. Instead, he continued to care for her, spending more time in her company, learning about her past, and slowly earning her trust. Lyra, too, began to notice the way her heart responded whenever he was near, though she was afraid to name the feeling. Their quiet peace did not last long. Word had spread quickly that the Alpha King had taken in an Omega from Thornwood territory, and it was not long before Beta Cain arrived at the border demanding her return. Cain stood at the edge of Ferocian lands with a small group of Thornwood wolves behind him, his expression hard and demanding. "She belongs to my pack," he declared when Ronan came to meet him. "You have no right to keep her here." Ronan's expression darkened. "She belongs to no one who treated her the way you did," he said. "I know what you did to her, Cain. I know the shame you caused her in front of your entire pack." Cain's confidence faltered only slightly before he straightened and spoke again. It was pack business. Nothing more. But Lyra, who had come to stand behind Ronan, despite his attempt to keep her sheltered from the confrontation, stepped forward. "Tell them the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Tell them why you really rejected me." Cain's eyes flickered with unease. The Thornwood wolves behind him exchanged uncertain glances. Under pressure, and unable to maintain his composure before witnesses from both territories, Cain finally admitted what he had hidden for so long. He had rejected Lyra not because their bond was weak, but because he had already arranged a political marriage with the daughter of a neighboring pack's alpha, a match that would strengthen his position within Thornwood. Lyra had simply been an inconvenience standing in the way of his ambitions. Gasps rose from the Thornwood wolves who had accompanied him, clearly unaware of his true motives. Ronan's anger, already simmering, boiled over into cold, controlled fury. "You humiliated her for your own gain," Ronan said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "You will not take her from here." Cain, desperate to save face in front of his own pack members, refused to back down. He invoked pack law, insisting that as her original intended mate, he still held rights over her fate, regardless of his rejection. Tension crackled in the air as both sides prepared for the possibility of conflict. It was then that Ronan invoked an ancient right known to few outside royal bloodlines, the Sovereign's Claim, a law stating that a true fated bond, once acknowledged by an Alpha King, superseded any prior rejection or arrangement. To settle the matter and prevent unnecessary bloodshed between the packs, he challenged Cain directly, wolf to wolf, leader to leader. The fight that followed was fierce but brief. Cain, though strong, was no match for the disciplined power of an Alpha King who had spent his life defending his kingdom. Within minutes, Ronan had overpowered him, pinning him down before the gathered wolves of both territories. Rather than ending the confrontation with violence beyond what was necessary, Ronan released him, choosing instead to let Cain's own exposed betrayal be his punishment. The Thornwood wolves who had witnessed the confession stared at their beta with new eyes, no longer seeing a respected leader, but a man who had manipulated and discarded one of their own for personal gain. Word of what happened spread quickly through both territories, and within days, the Thornwood elders convened to strip Cain of his title, disgusted by his dishonesty and cruelty. Lyra, watching from the sidelines as her old life crumbled and a new one began, felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. The shame she had carried for so long, the belief that she was unworthy simply because she had been rejected, began to lift from her shoulders. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the rejection had never been about her worth at all. It had been about Cain's ambition and nothing more. With the conflict resolved and her ties to Thornwood formally severed by the pack elders, Lyra was free for the first time in her life to choose her own path. She returned to the Ferocian stronghold with Ronan, uncertain of what the future held but no longer afraid to hope. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains surrounding the kingdom, Ronan led her to a quiet garden within the stronghold walls, away from the watching eyes of his court. There, beneath a sky turning gold and lavender, he finally spoke the words he had held back for so long. "You are my mate," he said softly. "I knew it the moment I found you in those woods, though I did not want to believe it. I have never trusted fate, but I cannot deny what I feel when I am near you." Lyra's eyes filled with tears, though for the first time in a long while, they were not tears of sorrow. "I was afraid," she admitted, "afraid to trust another bond after what happened, afraid that I would be discarded again." Ronan took her hands gently in his. "I will never reject you," he promised. "You do not have to hide in the shadows anymore, not from me and not from anyone." For a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply standing together in the quiet garden as the last light of day faded into evening. Lyra felt something inside her finally settle, a peace she had not known she was searching for. In the days that followed, Ronan formally presented Lyra to his kingdom, not as a broken outcast fleeing rejection, but as his true mate and future queen. The wolves of the Ferocian kingdom, who had once watched her with suspicion, came to respect and admire her quiet strength and gentle heart. Lyra, who had once believed she would never matter to anyone, found herself surrounded by a pack that valued her completely. In the weeks that followed, Lyra slowly learned what it meant to belong somewhere without fear. She walked through the halls of the stronghold without flinching, spoke with the pack's elders without shrinking back, and even began to laugh again, a sound that had been missing from her life for far too long. The wolves who had once whispered about the strange Omega from Thornwood now greeted her with warmth, and some even sought her out for advice, drawn to the calm patience she carried after everything she had survived. Ronan, too, changed in ways he had not expected. The king who had once dismissed fated bonds as foolish stories found himself softened by her presence, more willing to listen, more careful with his words, and quicker to smile when she was near. His advisors, who had questioned his decision to bring her into the kingdom, now admitted that she had brought something valuable to their court, a steadiness and warmth that balanced his strength. News eventually reached them that Thornwood, under new leadership after Cain's disgrace, had begun rebuilding its reputation among the neighboring packs. Lyra felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a quiet sense of closure. She no longer needed him to suffer to prove her own worth. She had already found that on her own, in the woods that once seemed like her ending, and became, instead, her beginning. On the night of the next full moon, the Ferocian kingdom gathered once more, this time not for a rejection, but for a joining. Lyra stood at the center of the circle, just as she had months before in Thornwood, but everything about this night felt different. There was no fear in her chest, only steady hope. Ronan stood before her, his eyes full of a certainty that needed no words, and together they spoke the bonding vows that would tie them forever, this time completed, this time chosen freely by both. The wolves around them howled in celebration, their voices rising together under the silver moon. Lyra closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. feeling for the first time in her life that she was exactly where she belonged. Looking back, she understood that the path that had once seemed like the end of everything had actually led her exactly where she was always meant to be. The woods that had hidden her in her darkest hour had also led her to the one bond that would never break. She had run from rejection only to find, at last, the destiny that had been waiting for her all along,